Today we're going to factor when our a value is larger than 1. So now we are going to have a number in front of x squared. And before we actually start factoring number 1, I would like us to cross out example number 2 and put this warm-up problem in its place. And I'm going to put some very specific steps down. I'm going to have you write this in a way that you probably aren't used to writing it. We're going to use the distributive property to multiply x plus 2 times 3x plus 1. Now, do you all agree that in doing this, you would take the x and distribute it, and then you would take the 2 and distribute it? Do you all agree that that's how we would do this problem? Okay, so I'm going to write that like this. X times 3x plus 1 plus 2 times 3x plus 1. This is the distributive property fully written out. We're doing x times the second set of parentheses, that's what's written in blue, and then we're doing 2 times the second set of parentheses, that's what's written in green. So now let's actually do that. X times 3x is 3x squared. X times 1 is 1x. 2 times 3x is 6x, and 2 times 1 is 2. What would we do next? These two terms in the middle, 1x and 6x, we would combine them. So our final answer would be 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. Take a look at what example 1 is.
Oh my God. Whoa.
So, the factored form of number 1 is x plus 2 times 3x plus 1. We are going to learn how to start here and do these steps backwards to try to get back to the factored form. And I wanted you to see it written out like that because these are the steps that we're going to follow in reverse. So our first step is going to be figure out how to take this 7x and split it up into 1x and 6x. So our first goal is how do we figure out what those two numbers need to be? And this is just like what we did yesterday. So we are looking for two numbers that multiply. Instead of multiplying to give us 2, our c value, because we have an a value that's bigger than 1, you need to multiply a times c. Our a value is 3, our c value is 2. A times c will be 6. We're still looking for a sum of our b value, 7. And so I believe I put this in the directions. Look for factors of AC that have a sum of b. So two things whose product is AC, whose sum is 7. What numbers satisfy that? 1 and 6. So we write this out uncombining the 7x. We're going to write it as plus 1x plus 7x plus 2. Okay, so step 1, figure out how to uncombine our middle term. We just figured out that those numbers are 1 and 6, so we uncombined 7x into, oops, I wrote it wrong. That's why you're confused right now. Whew. 3x squared plus 1x plus 6x plus 2. That 1x and 6x in the middle would recombine to give us our 7x. So we haven't changed our statement. We've just altered how it looks. Our next step is to figure out how to pull this thing out of the parentheses over here in the second line down. So split this into two groups. We're grouping the statement into two groups of 2. In the first group, find the GCF. What does 3x squared and 1x have in common? An x. So we can undistribute an x, or you can think of it as dividing both of these things by x. So 3x squared, if we pull one of those x's out, we'd be left with 3x. Take the term 1x, pull the x out of it, you'd be left with 1. And then the next set, 6x and 2. What do 6x and 2 have in common? Now, a common thing I hear is 3. Yes, 6x and 2 are related to 3, but you can't do 2 divided by 3. So think of it more as, what is the biggest number that you can divide out of both of these? You can divide 2 out of both of those. So 2 is what goes outside of the parentheses. 6x divided by 2 is 3x. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Now, remember, you can distribute to check yourself. So 2 times 3x is 6x. 2 times 1 is 2. So this is still all there. We are now at this step right here. This is the distributive property fully written out. We now need to collapse that distributive property back into only 2 parentheses. So the x and the plus 2 forms your first set of parentheses. And the 3x minus 1, oops, that's kind of a really bright color. I don't know. The 3x plus 1 becomes your other set of parentheses. Our first step is still to use the blanks to figure out what that pair of numbers is. The important thing here is that because we have an a value that isn't 1, we need to multiply our a value times our c value. So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. And we're adding to get what number? What's our middle number? A 1. Multiply to get negative 6 and add up to 1. What numbers would those be? How about negative 2 and 3? Your next step is to rewrite it as 4 terms. So keep your 2x squared. Instead of this plus x, we're going to split that into negative 2x plus 3x. And then don't forget about the minus 3 at the end. Now, if you write 3x minus 2x instead of negative 2x plus 3x, you will end up getting the same answer. Your parentheses will just be in the other order, which is fine. Okay, break this into 2 groups. In our first group, what do 2x squared and negative 2x have in common? 2x. So what we're basically doing is dividing both of these terms by 2x. And if you need to write that in there to help you, that is totally fine. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. X squared divided by x is x. What is negative 2x divided by 2x? Negative 1. And remember, you can check yourself. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. In the second set of parentheses, what do 3x and negative 3 have in common? 3. If I take 3x and divide out the 3, what's going to be left? The x. If I take negative 3 divided by 3, negative 1. Your 2 sets of parentheses should match. You should have x minus 1 and x minus 1. If you put your 2 terms in the other order, then you would have 2x plus 3 in both of your parentheses. If your parentheses don't match, go back and look at what maybe you did wrong, because you did something wrong. The 2x and the plus 3 are your first set of parentheses, and the x minus 1 is your second set. I would like you to try number 4 on your own. Okay, so the important thing is that you multiply your a value times your c value. So 6 times negative 5 is negative 30. You're looking for a pair of numbers whose product is negative 30 and whose sum is 13. Now, some of you have this amazing ability in your brain to look at this and say, oh, it's these numbers. My brain isn't like that. And if your brain isn't like that, that's okay. Some brains don't work that way. So this is what my brain says when I look at this. Multiply to negative 30 and add to 13. I don't know. How am I supposed to figure that out? That's what my brain initially does. So if that's what your brain is doing, that's okay. Here's a way to cope with it if that's what your brain is doing, or here's a way to get your brain to think about it better. List out the ways that you can multiply to get 30 and be very systematic about it. So 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6. When I do this, I first think, oh, 3 and 10 make 13. But do 3 times 10 equal negative 30? No, we need one of them to be negative, and if one of them's negative, then they don't add up to 13. So 3 times 10 is not going to work. But 2 times 15, if we did negative 2 and positive 15, we could get a product of negative 30 and a sum of 13. So split this up into 4 terms. It was brought to my attention that pretty much every example we've had so far has had negative 2x as the second term. That is just a coincidence. The negative 2 and the 15 come from that pair of numbers. That's where that negative 2 and 15 come from. Now that we have this written as 4 terms, we've uncombined that like term. Oh my gosh. Now we need to split this into 2 groups. 6x squared and negative 2x. What can I divide out of both of those? 2x. 6 divided by 2 is 3. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. X divided by x is also negative 1. 15x and 5. What do 15x and 5 have in common? They are related to 3, but can we divide both of them by 3? 5. 15x divided by 5 is 3x, and negative 5 divided by 5 is negative 1. So our factored form would be 2x plus 5 times 3x minus 1. Let's do number 5. First, we need to do the blanks. Because our a value is bigger than 1, we need to multiply a times c. So 3 times negative 6 is negative 18. Those same 2 numbers have to add up to our b value of 7. See if you can figure out those 2 numbers, split it into 4 terms, and factor. Negative 18 and 7. I think 2 and 9 are going to be the pair. Again, it's a negative 2. I'm going to write this the other way. Normally I do minus 2x and then plus 9x, but this time I'm going to do plus 9x minus 2x because I want you to see what happens when your third term is negative. Then I'm going to split this. The first 2, the way that I wrote it, are going to have 3x in common. The second 2, here's a big, huge, helpful hint. If your third term is negative, drop that negative down. You're going to factor out negative 2. So negative 2x divided by negative 2 is positive x, and negative 6 divided by negative 2 is positive 3. You want your 2 sets of parentheses to match. The first set of parentheses is the stuff in front, the 3x and the minus 2. The other set is that matching pair. If you did this the other way with negative 2x plus 9, you would have ended up with x and 3 and then 3x plus 3 or 3x plus minus 2 inside the parentheses. So let's say I gave you an additional problem and said, what is the factored form of 16x squared minus 49? Hopefully you would notice that 16 is a perfect square and 49 is a perfect square. 16 is a perfect square of 4, and 49 is a perfect square of 7. So it would be 4x plus 7, 4x minus 7.